Hello, welcome everybody. People are just trickling in, so I guess I'll start with kind of a brief little cookie cutter thing. What's everybody's favorite book that they've read so far? Keep it to like 1 to 2 sentences real quick as we have people trickle in. I'll start to say that I've been reading this like fantasy novel series called like Stormlight Archives. Really nice to finally take a break from reading so much productivity and like business stuff.
So,
Kevin, oh yeah,
fun
Aleyda, go ahead.
stuff. I started actually reading House of Dragon, the book, after I watched episode 1 because I realized that it was so good and there was like a proper book behind the story. But oh my God, 700 pages. I'm like, it will take a while. Let's see if I finish the book before the series actually ends in a few years.
I'll say all my reading is it's business oriented or very serious. So I was trying to think of something that was lighthearted and I can't come up with anything, but the Hostage at the Table is a business negotiation book that's very good.
Ooh, interesting. Kevin, Ethan, any books?
Well, I have to. My most recent favorite book is, of course, Product-Led SEO by Eli Schwartz.
Of course.
But my other favorite book is 15 Commitments of Conscious Leadership, which is this book that's actually very good about different patterns in the workplace, like don't gossip and how to give difficult feedback and things like that. It's super useful. So that's my favorite recent book, and then Product-Led SEO.
Yeah. Ethan, double on, I want to plus one 15 Commitments of Conscious Leadership, probably one of the books that changed my life the most. And the second one that also had a profound impact on me is Principles by Ray Dalio. Classic. If you haven't read it, then you should.
Awesome. Cool. We have over 125 people here now joining us for the roundtable. Want to just give a great thanks to Aleyda, Cindy, Ethan, Kevin, for joining us. We want to discuss everything that's been going on with Google's most recent algo update. Definitely a lot of chatter, right, that people have been speculating on. And so we figured, why not get some of the best and brightest minds in SEO together to think about and discuss what's been going on with the helpful content update, and also forecasting what this implies for SEO and content moving forward. A brief bit of introductions. We have Aleyda. Aleyda is an international SEO consultant and founder of Orianti, a highly specialized boutique SEO consultancy. She's a popular blogger, speaker, author of SEO, Las Claves Esenciales. Her writings have been published in Search Engine Land, Search Engine Journal, and Moz. We next have Cindy. Cindy is the CEO of Mobile Moxie and also an author of Mobile Marketing, Finding Your Customers No Matter Where They Are. She speaks and trains people around the world in mobile marketing and mobile SEO. Next, we have Ethan. Ethan's the CEO of Graphite, a premium growth agency. Graphite focuses on SEO content strategy that builds scalable growth engines for companies like Masterclass, Robinhood, and Netflix. Lastly, we have Kevin. Kevin is a strategic growth advisor and creator of the Growth Memo newsletter and host of the TechBound podcast. He's run SEO at organizations like Shopify, G2, Atlassian, and consulted for brands like Ramp, Eventbrite, Finder. He's also an active angel investor. Brief bit about myself. I'm the co-founder of Clearscope, the leading SEO content optimization software for quality content teams. Before Clearscope, I was doing SEO consulting, where I did companies like DoorDash, Strava, Compass, and I did a lot of growth advising at 500 startups. So round of applause for everybody here. To kick us off, I wanted to ask Kevin and Aleyda to kind of get their initial thoughts on what the Google helpful content is, and when it initially rolled out, what were your first impressions, right? You had a lot of things that y'all put together in terms of like the resources and your opinions that got shared pretty widely in the community. So just to start us off, what your initial impressions were.
So my initial impression is that this update could have been called the authenticity or originality update rather than helpful update, because and I have to say, I actually launched this poll over Twitter to see if people were seeing any impact, and most of the answers, and I got 629 votes, most of the answers, 58% of people didn't see any impact. Then 16% saw positive impact, 9% only mostly negative. And it makes sense, because when you go and take a look and see which are the websites that tend to have seen like an important, meaningful impact, these are all scrape, aggregated, non-original content type of websites, like, for example, manual, dictionary, lyrics type of websites. There are tons. If you go to Systrix, movers and shakers, and go to those websites that have dropped the most in this time interval, yeah, these are very like spammy type of websites, or not necessarily like real valuable businesses, or businesses that have a real business model or real product or service beyond ads. So it makes sense that all of us who are SEOs haven't seen any impact on our clients, right? That tend to have an actual product or service or value behind it.
Yeah, I want to double that. And to just like take a step back, I think like one context that this update fits into is that there's more and more content on the web. It's super easy to create content. We haven't even spoken about AI content. I'm gonna not dive into that for now. Maybe we can later, but in general, it's just super easy to publish, right? And the challenge that Google is in front of is that it's getting harder to crawl the web. One thing that wasn't mentioned in the context of this update is that every August for the last couple of years, we see indexing issues on Google's side and infrastructure problems. So there's a challenge of just reining in all this content. And then, of course, ranking it is also more and more challenging, right? For example, one of the types of sites that seem to have been impacted the hardest are lyric sites. And a lot of these sites are just copy pasting lyrics, right? There's no additional value to the user. It's pretty much duplicate content. And the sites that actually won, like genius.com and azlyrics.com, they all provide an additional value. Like at genius.com, you can comment and annotate lyrics, which is an additional value. And so Google just sets the bar higher and higher of what's acceptable content looks like. And this is another example of an update that does that and that facilitates that at scale. Now, one thing that I want to, before I pass it on, that I want to highlight real quick is that I think we all, and I certainly contributed to that, I think we all expected more regular content to be affected by this update. And what the very early data shows, it's really the bottom of the barrel type of content, like almost spammy, no value, goes after some high search volume queries that get a quick answer. Like I saw a website, for example, that teaches math, and they go after queries like, what's 10% of 73, right? It's like this super basic type of stuff. And that's, I think, what Google means with content that's created for search engines rather than users. So I'm going to stop there.
Yeah, Ethan, Cindy, anything to add?
Total agreement. I think that it may be that we'll really get a stronger sense in the next couple of weeks, right? It does seem like this was a plan, that they launched the helpful content update and then the September update. So it may be that, helpful content added some kind of new evaluation or some kind of new weighting, and then the core update kind of expanded that out or applied that in a wider way. So yeah, I think it's TBD, but definitely uniqueness uniqueness and value add are being given more weight, however that plays out.
Yeah, the way that I think about it is social media is filled with fake information and Google is filled with useless information. And so they're generally trying to solve this problem of useless information. And I think I've inferred 5 themes from the update. So the first 2 already existed theme one is, did you find your answer? Did you go back and get it somewhere else? And so that's the back to Google rate is a very bad signal, and finishing on your particular URL is a very good signal. So that's been around, and they're reiterating that. The second one is, are you making pages, or are you making content for Google? Or are you making it for users, which has also been around for a while. So they're reiterating that. There's three new themes that I see. The first theme that I think is very interesting is topical authority, which is something that we've been thinking a lot about at our company. And that means that rather than domain authority, which is what's your authority overall, what is your authority for a particular topical area? And so for Masterclass early on, Masterclass had authority for the names of the celebrities like Gordon Ramsay, but not for the food category overall. So we would focus on things like beef Wellington. And so topical authority is a great way for sites that are smaller or newer to rank for things. And Google repeated in several of their points, are you known for a particular thing? And the inputs for that are things like branded search, a Masterclass and Gordon Ramsay, or when somebody types in beef Wellington and they landed on your site, do they have good engagement? And then you'll basically build topical authority that way. So that's one new theme. The second new theme is rewritten content, which I think is probably the biggest problem around useless content, which is everyone's rewriting each other's articles. And they do that because it's cheaper. It costs more money to write a brand new article and to have somebody with expertise. And so you just say, hey, go rewrite the first result, and then somebody else rewrites that result, and everyone's rewriting each other's content. And then you have basically thousands of the variations of the same thing.
Well, it's not just cheaper. Sorry. It's not just cheaper. It takes original thought, and that's hard.
Yes.
Like, and I think Google wants to reward, wants to make things a little bit more fair, where if you have original thought that's valuable, that you get rewarded with traffic, even if you're not a great SEO, or even if you're not paying a content farm or whatever.
I think.
Yes, and oh, God.
Sorry, I think that actually Google did a good work documenting the type of criteria they will take into consideration, because in the original doc that they publish, they actually mention they will be able to identify if the content seems to have little value, low added value, or is otherwise not particularly helpful to those queries, right, for the searches. So they actually have like a very straightforward system, let's say, and the low added value or little value, especially for queries that, as Kevin mentioned before, we can see like broader queries, ambiguous queries that can have like a diverse type of intent. So for example, I see like queries, for example, wire cutters or toy guns, for which like aggregators of reviews and like we're ranking before in the top 10, not anymore. Like I see more whether actual best type of list, well written and researched and backed, and then commercially driven category pages that are like rich in their content ranking now instead, right? So I do believe that Google has like done a really good job in this case, like specifying that this automatically generated content, or that you pretty much just use whatever tool out there, or very cheap writer without not knowledge at all, in order to be able to rank for this broad term or query. Like, yeah, you're not going to be able to do that anymore that easily, right?
Us here in agreement that, and this is one of like the questions that have already popped up, is that the helpful content update is like Panda version 1, right? Where it's very clear that certain sites, lyric ones, like being the example that we're all familiar with, which are all more or less copy and paste examples from one another, are taking great hits. And I think we're all trying to talk right now about this idea of original, relevant, high quality content, where the content itself has information gain, or, some people call it originality, uniqueness, a special point of view. So I want to ask then, to make this kind of a more actionable point, what does that information gain or unique and relevant content mean to each of you? And how would you really start to think, okay, if helpful content, at least in its current form, and it's very likely Google will continue to build on top of that. How are you thinking about adding information gain where you're not just simply, just rewriting what is being written? And also similarly, you can imagine information gain is a potential way that Google might think about combating AI content, where AI content, right, at least with the current models, is simply regurgitating a lot of what was already written as well. So how are you thinking about information gain, and how are you thinking about creating unique, relevant content moving forward? What are your thoughts there?
Can we pass it to Ethan? I want to hear what the rest of his thoughts were about the previous question, and then maybe you can answer the next one too.
Yeah, well, the last thought is just around, I would say, a misapplication of SEO tools. Like SEO tools will say, in general, the word count is this, or in general, people are talking about these things, which is useful. And then you would say, okay, well, so in general, maybe people want this particular length, or these are themes that people are interested in. And a misapplication is, okay, well, I have to have 1,057 words, and I have to include the word lemon 6 times. I think that's a misapplication of tools. And so I think that was my last theme. And then Bernard, your question of how we're thinking about it. I think the main thing is that the reason why there's rewritten content and regurgitated content, number one, is because it works. Number two is because it's expensive to have premium, unique content. So I think you need to change the business model. And the reason why you do that is because if you write 100 articles, 5 of them are going to work, and you don't know which 5, and so you have to spend a small amount of money on the 100. So if you can be more thoughtful about selecting those 5 that are going to work and spending more money on those, and then Google changes their system to incentivize uniqueness, then you can justify spending that money. So we spend a lot of time just being really thoughtful about picking those 5 so that we can spend that money. And then so on our end, we basically hire domain experts who are, journalists that, if we're working in finance, we would hire a journalist who's written in finance, who has some domain expertise. Now we have a business model to justify, write really great content for these 5 niche topics. That's how we're thinking about it.
So I'll add in kind of a unique thought, at least I think, is that it does seem very much like in this update and a couple of the previous ones, Google is directly going after affiliates and aggregator sites. And that is something that they've done for a long time, but there's a unique reason why they would be doing that now, because you see they're going after the affiliate sites on this side of the page, and then on this side of the page they are becoming more and more of an affiliate site themselves. So Google pushing everyone hard towards Merchant Center, and of course flights and hotels, and rumors of car stuff and insurance stuff, and all the other things where Google wants to be an aggregator. It doesn't want competition either, and so there's possibly some double dealing.
Yeah, I do agree with that very much, because one type of sites, I mean, we spoke about kind of content that doesn't add a lot of value, but there's also a lot of content that just answers very shallow questions. And that's something that Google does already themselves, and they do it pretty well, and they don't need sites to do that necessarily. So I do agree that there's an angle of maybe the primary intention is to just say, what else can we answer ourselves? But of course, that has an impact on stuff like affiliate revenues, data that companies can gather, even from shallow questions and users that they can track.
Well, and the other thing, Kevin, and this is something that I've been talking about a lot, is that, and I say double dealing like it's bad, and maybe it's bad, but maybe, Google does, I think, have the best interest of the user in mind. But when they can pull in a feed or host something in their cloud, they can know that it's live and good and up, and they can serve it more quickly, and they can transcribe it, transcode it into audio or whatever. And I think that that's kind of where they want to go with the future of connected devices, Internet of Things, multimodal search, right? When they host the info, they can understand it faster, better, and serve it faster, better.
Yeah, I think that Google is definitely, I agree with the 2 things, right? On one hand, raising the bar for the position 0 type of queries that they will be looking to answer anyway and grab and keep the traffic to them. And then on the other hand, the money-making ones, at the end of the day, they're also shifting to become an e-commerce type of portal too, competing with Amazon. And we just saw, like earlier today, like an hour ago, so yet another new release from them, facilitating for anybody pretty much just using structured data to be able to make the most out of the product carousels and now in SERP. So I can, so and a lot of the updates that they have been doing also in the affiliate reviews for a few since last year or so have been very focused on that those that actually focus on those queries have original content, originally review this product. So originality and authenticity here, and getting the bar higher in order to grab this traffic is certainly there's certainly a pointing to that. Then on the other hand, definitely the way to go will be to hire experts to write the content. But if we think about it, it's not that easy. Like the real expert will be actually doing that on a day-to-day, right, rather than necessarily only writing about it. So for example, I get emails from time to time about like asking me to write something, and they would pay to me, and like, no thank you. I mean, I'd rather focus on doing actual SEO with my high-paying clients and brands, right? How grow brands, and then whenever I want, I will share my insights about that experience rather than being hired as a writer. However, I think that a good approach that we can see in our own sector is the one that, for example, Content King has with their research. They have a very well-developed content hub. They call it SEO Academy. And what they have done is to cover every area or topic, the major ones in SEO nowadays. And they have their own SEO writing the content, and then this SEO will ask for input of people specialized in that area, so they can actually have like this added value of real experts. And the effort for the expert is actually minimal, because it's just a little quote or an idea or an experience in that particular area, right? And then of course, like, you incentivize the person with a link back. The person will also share with their own audience or the community, and usually these are influencers too. So there's a win-win type of approach. Of course, it's very easy when the topic is SEO and we are all willing and are very knowledgeable of the value of participating. But I do believe that there are many different ways nowadays, like with Harrow or other similar services out there, to get input from experts too.
Another question or dimension of thought that I want to add is that information gain looks very different based on the keyword, or at least user intent, right? If it, like, one piece of information gain could just simply be looking for the results of a football game or a soccer game for the fellow Europeans. And that's like, there's like the key piece of information is the score, of course, but maybe some information gain is the different statistics that a team got, and, like, I don't know, like the intercepts or whatever. And so, but that's very different, right? From an e-commerce perspective, there's certainly the price, but then there's also stuff like, how does it fit? How does it fit for a certain body type? You know, so there's all sorts of secondary, tertiary information that companies don't need to think about to kind of quantify what information gain really means. And the most fuzzy aspect is when it comes to a very complex topic that's covered mostly with text, right? So when you maybe write about why did, I don't know, Napoleon fail in Russia or whatever, right? Make something up, something that needs a lot of explanation. That's where, in my mind, information gain is the hardest, and it's the easiest when it just comes to providing users data that's very useful.
Question here from Amelia, who asks, does Google take into account the expertise of the writer or just the originality of the content itself? I'm going to add a follow-up question to this. How does this all factor into expertise, authority, and trustworthiness, and what you've seen a lot of websites do, where it's medically reviewed by X, or, you know, trying to infuse the content to make it look more trustworthy. What are y'all's thoughts on this?
I mean, I think,
Oh,
go ahead. Go ahead.
Oh yeah, I've never actually seen an impact from having a specific expert listed as the source of the information. I've only seen writing content around where your topical authority is, you'll rank better for that. So like the masterclass example, you'll rank for Beef Wellington because you have topical authority for Gordon Ramsay. But I've seen no impact from listing Gordon Ramsay as author versus masterclass editorial team versus no author. So that's my data.
I was just going to say that I think that that is what Google is trying to do, but it's hard because, like Aleyda was saying, the topical authorities are busy being topical authorities and aren't necessarily also being authors. And so there are going to be people who write that finding up, whether they're the expert or not. So it's a tough thing to do algorithmically.
I do believe that is very hard to isolate, right? Like, because for example, Lily, right? She's very focused on EIT. She has shared quite a few examples in her experience where she mentions how doing a set of improvements on the articles, among them listing a clear author and having like, but these are usually also your money and your life type of topics where we know the sensitiveness is a little bit higher than other type of topics. And also, like, at the end of the day, it's also very hard to, let's say, at a granular level, let's say, isolate what is that, the authority of the author, the authority of the publication itself in general, like things like the authority of the backlinks to pointing to the piece, things like that, right? However, I have to say that the clearer signals you can provide of being an authority in that field that you're writing, the better will be. One of the things that we need to keep in mind also, I believe that Google has done a really good job in this case and documenting the update. One of the questions that they actually added there, focus on people first content in that section is like, are you keeping in mind our guidance for core updates and for products reviews? So they all overlay, and at the end of the day, the intent and the goal of Google is pretty much the same. They want high value content that is expert written, that is actually comprehensive, that actually adds value, etc. I actually aggregated all of the questions in a Google sheet that I share around to make it easier for us, because the difficulty that I can see from this is many times explaining to copywriters in a versatile way for them to double check and validate beyond the tools. Because indeed, as I think it was Ethan who mentioned before, if we start adding the recommended number of keywords and the length in the piece, well, we can always work around and just have a listicle of keywords, and that's it at the end of the day, and it will pass the ratings, or we'll have good ratings that will pass the validation, right? But we need to think about, is this really comprehensive? Will answer in a better way the need of the user searching for this versus all these other players that are already ranking for this query? At the end of the day, this is very context focused. So what I actually will think about is, like, if there are many articles already ranking the top positions, all clearly being written by doctors with very visible credentials, I want to ensure that I have that too. I don't want to be missing that for sure.
That's a good point. And I really wonder how close Beef Wellington is to what's his name? The chef. Oh, help me out real quick.
Gordon Ramsay.
Thank you, Gordon Ramsay. On Google's entity graph. I'm sure they're not too far away. And so this is kind of my take on authorship and how important it is to have authors. I think that Google can understand the connection between entities, and if an author is an entity in Google's knowledge graph, then they can probably understand that. But I do think the bar is incredibly high to be recognized as an author or an important person in the eyes of Google, right? So like there's probably some credentials or some publications or some sort of media attention that you have to have for that. Two examples I want to highlight really quick to make this practical is there are two sites that do this, that highlight authors, and they do really well. One is Healthline, a very, very successful site in the medical space, and the other one is Forbes Advisor, which has gotten a lot of attention from SEOs recently because they rank for best truck tires or whatever. They've been crushing it in general lately. And I don't think that they've been crushing it because they highlight the author that wrote the article, but because they, first of all, go to length to show how often the article was reviewed and by who it was reviewed. And those are typically subject matter experts. By the way, Chewy does that as well. They have I think it's a pet disease content hub or something that has content reviewed by veterinarians. And third, and this is, I think, the most important piece, is just that the content is better because I do believe that it was reviewed by experts. So it's less that Google says, oh, it was reviewed 3 times, and oh, these people have a doctor title, but I think it's much more that the facts are correct, and the information gain and depth of information is pretty high on these articles. That would be my take.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that obviously as SEOs, a lot of people are trying to understand the ways that the algorithm works and look to expedite gaming the potential systems that the algorithm is looking for. And I think a lot of that time, what SEOs might end up doing is chasing the wrong signal. And I think in this particular case, this is one of those ideas where you see a lot of top websites, whether it be Chewy, Healthline, right, where they do these medically reviewed by, and people see that and say, wow, that must be, right, the rationale of why this page is doing so well. And they look to basically replicate that sort of experience. But I think to build off of what you were saying, Kevin, it's really that because it's been reviewed by a lot of experts, there is a lot of good evidence-backed suggestions and statements that are being made. And, you know, oftentimes people just want to eat the cake and not really do the work. And I think that's what you see a lot of people then chasing the wrong signal and saying, okay, well, I need that. But really, you know, a lot of the best articles, they don't necessarily need that reviewed by this expert. They just need to have that right structure and that right brand and that right user experience where, you know, when I land on an affiliate site, I want to know why I can trust you and what was your evaluation criteria that you took to make these decisions. And I want to see photos of you actually using each one of the different products and really showing me that you did a good job in this evaluation. And, you know, a lot of people in affiliates just slap on well, you know, Kevin Indig reviewed this and they're like, that should be good, right? And it's like, no, like, you got to do the work. And I think, you know, this update is Google's way of currently kind of putting some PR behind what they want to influence us as content creators. And I think it's very similar to what Ethan has like stated in his initial like thoughts on helpful content. It's very likely that this is like, you know, version 0.1. And, you know, we're going to see Google continue to build on top of this like framework that they've had. And I think just lots of good thoughts like going around here.
I think that it is really worthy here to be proactive, right? I mean, if we know that Google intent and goal is to try to sort of replicate human assessment of value and satisfaction, let's try to identify as much as possible all those signals that we use, and we certainly want to integrate within our work and effort in order to be best in class, right? I don't want to wait until Google confirms that they use X or Y as a signal just for me to start doing it. I know that I want to give the best experience to my clients, to my users in the website. This actually goes most of times like well aligned with user UX, right? And with a lot of other, let's say, good practices in general to provide the best expectations or to fulfill the expectations of users, right? So I will try to, as much as possible, to align my work with the product team, with the UX team, in order to whatever we can highlight and show to users that we know that will improve the conversions anyway and help to achieve results, I'm all for it.
There's also this concept that's going around with kind of blaming the internet and social media and Google and all the big players for kind of dumbing down content and rewarding the lowest common denominator, or just rewarding engagement that is not necessarily with high quality content. And you see that even with guidelines that come out about people who write complex sentences. Oh, like Google doesn't like complex sentences. And yeah, Google's algorithm, has a hard time parsing a complex sentence. So that kind of makes sense. But at the same time, we don't, if I'm Google, I don't want to just reward sites that write, Jane likes beef Wellington. Jane wants to cook beef Wellington. Jane needs 10 ingredients. You have to, I think that it may be a backing off of that kind of simplicity, or a more rewarding of content that is a bit more nuanced. And that would, if I were Google, I would want that, because I would separate myself from maybe Facebook or things like that, because you do see, like in Google Discover, some really lowest common denominator content coming in, and it's because of just kind of engagement. And if you want to separate yourself from just rewarding that kind of thing, you would do what they're doing now, or the way they're communicating it. That's what I would be going for.
I want to circle this back around to a lot of Q&A that's been popping up. I know we're like kind of dancing around this whole information gain topic, but Justin asks, okay, but how is Google going to determine original thought, right? Back to this information gain thing, really to say, okay, if we're going to put on, our SEO, like crystal ball hats here, how are y'all thinking about, practically speaking, demonstrating to Google that you have content that has information gain, since, a lot of it could be very subjective, and measuring originality is something very difficult, at least potentially difficult, for AI to accomplish.
I have thoughts on this. So I think the answer that sounds good is good engagement. You found your answer, you did go back to Google, but those have already been signals. So I don't think that's the full solution. I think the solution is around uniqueness and useful uniqueness. So the way that the algorithm currently works is there's a few specific, or there's labels that a machine learning algorithm trains for. So like these three results are great. So anything that is as similar to these three results is also great, which means everyone's rewriting each other's articles, and therefore the system incentivizes everyone to rewrite each other's articles. So then you want uniqueness, but you want useful uniqueness. So if you think about a camera, if you have on a camera and you have the word tangerine and nobody else has the word tangerine, that's unique, but it's not useful uniqueness. But if for that camera, you're the only one that talked about low light photography, that's useful uniqueness. And so the way that I think that they would do that is they would know that low light photography and camera are close to each other in their knowledge graph, and tangerine's way over here. So my guess is that they're going to be looking for, did you mention subtopics and themes that others didn't, but it is, closely associated within a knowledge graph, is my guess.
Yeah, I agree on the knowledge graph. I don't think this is so difficult for Google, to be very honest and blunt. I think that one of the big questions in this whole conversation is also, what's the stack rank of the signals, or how do they relate to each other? And I think in the past, even though it was often denied, there was like a big impact from backlinks. I'm not saying that's necessarily going away, but for originality to make a bigger impact, you can also just turn other signals slightly down, or that originality slightly up. But Google should already be able to understand what information a piece of content has, especially after transformers and MUM. I mean, this is based text mining on steroids, if you will. So that should be very obvious to Google. And then another signal to pair this with, because not every signal lives in isolation, is the behavior of users. And so if you go back, right, if you start with a very high level topic or a very, very short query, you read something and you go back and you enter a longer query that is more targeted, Google can understand that perfectly fine, right? This is how a lot of personalization works. And they can measure very well what that looks like after people have visited a certain piece of content. So I think there's several signals that balance each other that help Google to make a right call. And from a purely technical perspective, I don't think that this is something groundbreakingly new. I think this is a signal that Google has decided to amp up because the content quality is often so bad.
I'll just throw one more thing in, and that is the content frequency. So even though this is another thing that Google denies, that having an aggressive publishing schedule where you're publishing every day, Google says that doesn't help you. But I think that in some cases it does create some benefits, or has created some benefits. But if you're the original thinker, the original creator, the original author, you might not be publishing every day, and that's okay. So I tend to see this, and perhaps differently than the other panelists, I see it a little bit as a easing off of some things that have been maybe not direct signals, but secondary signals and rewards, in lieu of things that are harder to create with AI or create with a team of regurgitating writers.
Yeah, speaking of AI, that's been a topic that's been highly speculative, highly, sought after. So let's talk about AI. What are your thoughts about AI content as it relates to SEO, this concept that we're talking about, information gain? And, I start with Kevin. You had a really great blog post recently that talks about basically the pros and cons, right? It's not a do it or don't do it. It depends on the situation. AI is really good for certain classes of content, more specifically definitional things, right? Things where I would say, and this is back to that content uniqueness idea. AI is really good when us as human beings have all decided that X is X, right? The first president of the United States was George Washington, and AI is really good at that. So anyways, what are people's thoughts about how AI, specifically, content created by stuff like GPT-3, is going to influence SEO content moving forward? We'll start with you, Kevin.
Yeah, thanks for setting the stage, Bernard. As you already mentioned, I think we really have to talk about the types of content and what the role of content is. It is not always the product or the thing itself. It can sometimes also just be adjacent or supporting the main role of the show, or the main piece of content, which in the e-commerce, for example, is the product, right? And then you have a lot of content around that describes the product or gives you helpful secondary information that helps with information gain. And for things that are not overly complex, AI already does a good job. And this is something that I changed my mind on a lot. Before I saw, more practical examples, I actually thought that, when companies have AI, they all kind of create the same content, and then Google just devalues it like they devalue links. And I don't think that's true. I think what's actually happening is that some companies are figuring out how to do this, and do this well for certain types of purposes and certain types of content. And it ranks pretty well. So in the light of the helpful content update and previous statements by Google spokespeople, there was this notion that Google hates AI content. And so I paid a lot of attention on sites that lean heavily on AI content to drive organic traffic. And the traffic has only increased during the helpful content update. At least that definitely hasn't tanked. And so to me, that goes to show that if you do it well and if you do it right, then there's no problem with AI content. Why should it matter who creates the content? It doesn't matter if it's a machine or human. All that matters is information gain, and is it useful?
100% is how you use it. Actually, I want to add here a scenario that I see a lot with clients that tend to go through the internationalization process. Most of translations tools at this point leverage automatically translated or automatic translators like DeepL, amazing quality already, or Weglot, for example, like they integrate into the human translator process or workflow to facilitate their task, and they can have that as an input. That doesn't mean that the content will be completely translated by AI, completely by the tool, by translation, but that it will be much easier for the translator to go ahead and do potentially, I don't know, 10 pieces per day rather than 5 or 4, right? So it can definitely accelerate the process, and it shouldn't be detrimental for the quality at all, right? I believe that there's this like good sweet spot, as Kevin mentioned. It makes me remember a lot with templated content back in the day, right? Like, oh, is templated content good or bad? Oh, it depends on how you actually leverage it and how smart you are, how creative you are in it. What are the criteria that you take into consideration to generate it, right? And do you use stats? Do you use your unique insights, like et cetera, et cetera. So exactly the same is how you use it, how you include it, what type of content it is, in what type of pages. Is this content actually valuable to answer the doubts at that stage of the journey, independently if it is 100% original or not? So there's a lot to be said there. And so I will highly recommend people to be creative about it, to think of how you can leverage it rather than leave it on autopilot, which is definitely not great. How you can use it to accelerate the process of content optimization, content translation, etc.
Yeah, just building on that, the way that I think about it is that there needs to be underlying wisdom. And so, especially if you have structured data, and an example would be a sporting event, and you talk about the score and somebody, somebody made a basket at this particular point in time, that's all structured data, and that can be generated. You can generate sentences based on underlying wisdom, which is that structured data. We invested in this one company called withpower.com, and they extract structure from clinical trial information and generate sentences based on that. And that has underlying wisdom. We then also tested generating product descriptions for products. And I remember GPT-3 said that a particular soap was oxide-free, but it wasn't oxide-free. And if you need it to be oxide-free, that would be a big problem. And the more nuanced it is, and the more it's based on personal experience, like Google mentions, did you use the product? If you need to have used the product to see if it's usable, you don't want GPT-3 telling you whether or not a product is usable. You want a human telling you that. So I think it needs to have underlying wisdom, and some things have structured data that you can automate having underlying wisdom, and a lot of stuff does not.
All right, we have quite a few open questions. I'm going to make this more of a rapid fire type thing, kind of throwing this to who I think might be like the best fit in answering. But if you have additional thoughts, kind of chime in and let's make this happen. So Anonymous asks, on the topic of expertise, what's stopping organizations from hiring journalists to do journalism? i.e. doing deep research, chasing experts for quotes and context, or publishing long explainer features like Vox and other journalistic publications. I'm going to kick this over to you, Ethan, since you're really deep into the content space right now.
I think it's the business model. So that costs money. And again, if you have 100 articles and 5 work and you don't know the 5, then you cannot afford to pay that writer. If you do know the 5, then you can afford to pay the writer. So the business model and selecting the topics that are likely to perform is number one. And then number 2 is that a lot of times journalists don't want to write content that's search friendly. So suggesting to the journalist, these are the general subtopics that users are interested in, versus, hey, please, stick these keywords in, guiding that journalist to answer questions that users have, but still have journalistic integrity. So the process of working with that journalist, those are the 2 main things. But I think that both of those can be done if you have a better process.
Awesome. All right. Another Anonymous asks, think Google should bring back authorship tags to determine the value of writers for determining expertise. If someone who is an expert at the CDC is writing on a news site about virology, should it be promoted more than an intern writing in the editorial column on that site? Should the power be in the author's topical authority expertise, or the power to be in the domain for what it's labeled as? I'm going to kick this over to you, Cindy. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so number one, I think that the author tag was educating Google about where to look for author information. And now that, it's changed and not as necessary. That doesn't mean it goes away. I think Google used the information and now they're just better at finding who is the author and ascertaining information about that author and connecting it to the topic. I think that every time Google does something like that, it's just asking us to code stuff so that it can train their algorithms to know where on the page and the site to find that information. So authorship still matters. The one thing I'll caution is that I think that we on the internet throw around authorship quite loosely, that anyone can be an author and publish things on the internet. But if we think about separate being an author online and writing stuff that anyone could publish online versus writing a book or writing something that has to be published by a publishing company, that kind of authorship may carry more cachet in Google's mind. So not just lumping all the different authors together. And yes, I do think that Google has the goal of connecting authors' credentials with what ranks where. The example earlier that Aleyda gave from all the PhDs writing about medical stuff, yes, you want to have the right credentials, and you don't just want a staff writer transcribing what the actual expert basically said. So, you know, hiring the experts when you can is always ideal. It's just like what Ethan said, the model doesn't allow, just there are only so many experts and they only have so much time. And so they're expensive and hard to get. And yeah.
Can you speak to the relationship between creating original content and using keywords or other SEO best practices? Are both still important? I'll tack on like a follow-up thing, you know, this idea of subtopic, search intent, zero keyword search volume, right? There's a lot of confusion now around, are you targeting keywords? Are you going after the long tail? What are we doing? I'm going to kick this over to you, Aleyda. What are your thoughts on this?
It depends on the goals of the business at the end of the day and what's their business model, right? Like for some type of businesses, it does make sense to develop topical authorities, and at the same time that they are targeting more commercial queries, to also develop a content hub for their top topics, for example. And indeed, like the challenge here many times is to, on one hand, like show the value of this type of content that will play a role through the customer journey, indeed, but won't necessarily like generate conversions right away, right? Like it won't be at the end of the journey necessarily. So it's important to a little bit educate, evangelize of the need of, okay, like if you want to establish yourself in your sector and you want to be thought as a leading brand, etc., you need to stop, like you need to develop this content. And then on the other hand, how you talk with writers in a way that you don't alienate them. I think that we have had a lot of that for a while, and SEOs in general, I'm afraid that in certain sectors with copywriters develop this reputation, right? I remember quite a few years ago when I was at this content conference in Minneapolis, and I was literally the only SEO in the whole conference that was pretty much focused on content people, and they did made a joke at the expense of SEO. Yes, and the SEO comes and tells you add keywords. Ha ha ha. Oh my God, it was terrible. Anyway, so I think that we are long past that with tools, with content tools. Of course, they provide us which are those terms that are identified to be semantically connected, relevant, related. But always, whenever I start with a new process, I do this, let's say, a little bit of trading and workshop with writers, and we go through practical art like sessions, showing like what does this make sense? Not because the other articles that are ranking in the top 10 already are mentioning this, and there are quite a few times that they mention it, it actually makes sense for you because maybe they have like there's diversity on the nature of the articles that are ranked, and you are not like these articles necessarily, but these other ones. So it's important that there's a good communication, best practices, yes, but always with the final goal. And this is something that I have found that writers appreciate a lot, that at the end of the day, they are the ones who are writing, they know about the topic, they are going to research that you can recommend, and it's highly advisable whenever it makes sense for the goal of the articles to include certain terms, but it's not like a red flag to, oh, you need to add 50 keywords. If you don't add them, it's bad. No. Sometimes it doesn't make sense. Sometimes it's not doable because of the role of that particular content, of that particular piece, and it's okay. So it's important to have this sort of conversation, and I do believe that copywriters will highly appreciate you clarifying this very common doubts, that it's not like back in the days, like keyword here, yes or yes, and we need to move away from this reputation indeed.
Couldn't agree more. A couple more, the highly upvoted ones. Federico asks, how much of a reaction to TikTok being used more and more to solve queries do you think this update is? I could not think of a better person than Kevin to answer this, because your recent blog post is more or less kind of talking about this. Kevin, your thoughts?
My thoughts, quick answer, I don't think the two are related, to be very straightforward. A signal that would have convinced me otherwise would be to see a lot more short video carousels in the search results, or see just a lot more TikTok content in general. But I think it's more like the anti-TikTok update, if I really think about it, because if we would transcribe like the majority of content on TikTok and rank that high in search results, there would be a lot more conspiracy theory believers and a lot more fake news. So I think actually TikTok really needs a helpful content update right now, or fact-checking content. So short answer, I don't want to hog the mic too much, but short answer is I don't think they're related, and content on TikTok is disastrous.
Mentioned that you write 100 pieces and 5 will work. How do you pick the 5? Is it based on volume, intent, difficulty to rank? Garrett then has a follow-up question. When you get to a more focused approach, do 10, maybe 20 out of the 100 begin to work?
It's two things. It's search volume at the topic level, and it's topical authority versus difficulty. So when I say topics, I mean for something like butter lettuce, that the masterclass article ranks for 500 different keywords, and the sum of the volume of those 500 is the volume of that topic. So that's the topic volume, number one, and then it's topical authority versus general keyword difficulty versus domain authority. So if you're known for, to the Gordon Ramsay example, if you're known for Gordon Ramsay, then you're going to be very topically authoritative and competitive for beef Wellington. So it's a combination of total volume times probability to rank equals expected visits. And then also ideally you have some sort of conversion intent. You can factor that back in, and then you can have expected traffic times conversion equals expected conversions.
Okay, to add on that, because topical authority has been thrown around quite a bit in this discussion, how do you know you have topical authority, and where would you go to figure out what those very related subtopics that you have a very high chance of placing for quickly look like?
For the first one, all you need to do is go to Google Search Console, download all your keywords, and then do n-grams on them. By that, I mean chop them up into 1-2 word phrases, and that's your topical authority. The inputs to that are branded search, so Masterclass plus Gordon Ramsay. That's like a backlink with rich anchor text, Gordon Ramsay. Backlinks with rich anchor text, those are the inputs. Shares of popular posts and what the post is about, those are the inputs. But the short answer to how do you know, literally just download all your keywords, and that's the answer to topical authority. How do you find adjacent topics? That's a little bit harder. So that you need to use keyword tools and use some intuition and stuff like that. There's not really an automated process. It's sort of mostly art and some science. I think, Google has their own knowledge graph. So ideally you would just be able to download their knowledge graph. But in lieu of that, you need to sort of make some guesses and use intuition. Somebody should build that tool though.
Somebody should. All right, I'm gonna then conclude with the final question from Anonymous. I'd love to hear what new directives or expectations you've given to content writers on your team, to your clients, to the people that you're working with, other SEOs, everybody. Let's close it out with this, maybe starting with Cindy. What are some new directives or expectations?
Well, so with the helpful content and then September update, we've always assumed that helpful content is something that was going to be impacted by a September update, and I think it will. But also looking backwards in the launch of pros and cons, I wonder if having nuanced perspectives is also considered helpful. And so marking up your pros and cons, that's kind of where I'm going right now, and making sure that you're giving kind of balanced information with pros and cons. That usually seems helpful to me. So that's kind of where I'm going.
Yeah, like the main goal that I have already for a while, and I reinstated every single time, is like, is this the most comprehensive and best in class piece of information that deserve to outrank all of the other players that are ranking at the top at the moment? So that should be like the North Star, and whatever it is required, depending on the intent, on the type of the format, of the query and the SERPs, right? Like let's try to leverage that and make the most out of that. Many times it will be to ask for testimonial to power users, or ask for reviews or integrate reviews, even to act. All the times it will be to ask for input from experts, for example. So it might be different depending on the nature of the content, of the type of content. But I think that as a good approach, it will be have that as a North Star to be the best of those that are already ranking, and add something extra, add something more on one hand, and then on the other hand, like understanding what are the opportunities within the SERPs, which are your competitors that are already ranking the top positions, not only in the organic ones, but also in the video carousel, if there is any. People also ask, like, pay attention of what is in the SERPs to leverage and learn and integrate as much as possible in order to perform and to be the best answer out there.
Yeah, no, I guess I'll go next. I think that to keep it short and simple, really think about your above the fold experience. Tons of people get this wrong. You kind of see it and like, oh, how do I do this? And then you have an H1 that's, what is this? And I'm like, oh, come on, that's not why the user is here. Or, you know, the concept of hero images, right? Lots of people just put random hero images in the top spots. And it's like, well, the user doesn't really care about that. So really just hone in on, okay, when a user clicks onto your site, can you give them the most useful, relevant information as quickly as possible? Pass over the mic to Ethan. Thoughts on directives?
The main directive is to cover all the subtopics and to be comprehensive. So for the butter lettuce example, try to understand what 500 keywords you're actually targeting and what the themes are. So like health benefits, comparing with other kinds of lettuce, recipes, and make sure that you cover all of those subtopic themes. Subtopics versus keywords. So don't over optimize for, you know, an exact word count or adding these specific keywords. Understand the general themes and subtopics and talk about all of them and fulfill the intent of the whole keyword cluster of the topic. But in general, we don't suggest to writers anything at all about SEO. It's more about, this is the outline and these are the subtopics and themes and questions that users have. Write a really good article. And we don't even talk about SEO with the writers.
Yeah, it's a good question. I haven't changed any guidance so far at all, because the data is still not out there, right? The September update is still running. We still don't know what's punished and what's changed, right? Imagine just on Google's announcement, I would have, you know, given guidance to companies to go to extra lengths, invest more budget, do all this stuff, and then we see just some like lyrics site being penalized. It already sucked. So I'm very cautious, but you know, the one thing that weighs on my mind a little bit is to you know, if it comes to stuff like content briefs, right, to add a question along the lines of like, how is this different than everything else, right? Like, what's the unique thing about this piece of content, or what's the unique insight that people take away that they cannot get anywhere else?
Kevin, thank you so much for joining us. I got a kick out of just hearing all of y'all's opinions, thoughts, perspectives, and I'm sure that our audience did too. There were so many good questions that were asked, so much good discussion. We definitely need to do this again, make this happen again. We'd love to have y'all on for an encore, you know, whether that's when Google announces random stuff or just regular programming. We would love to have you here. Thanks so much for joining us. And any concluding thoughts, opinions, questions from any of y'all panelists.
Thank you for getting us all together.
Yeah, it was great to speak.
Yes, we'll do it again. Take care, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Now, before we wrap this up, don't forget to share, like, and subscribe so you don't miss out on more great content from the industry's best SEOs, content marketers, and content strategists. The Clearscope webinar series happens every week and helps SEO content creators of all skill levels advance their knowledge. Hope to see you tune in next time.